All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another ePrime live stream. My name is Devon Struthers. I'm the training coordinator for Psychology Software Tools, and today we have another really fun task to talk about. So today's task is going to be the Game of Dice task. Now, what that's going to be is participants are actually going to be betting on the outcome of different dice rolls in ePrime. So it's going to kind of go along with the same kind of themes as last week's live stream with the balloon response task, or the balloon analog response task, where it's going to be all about risk and reward in this one as well. So we will go ahead and set this up. There are parts of it that are very specific and are going to require a little bit of, fine-tuning and finessing in order to make it look exactly perfect. So I will be pulling resources from a previously made experiment just to kind of speed things up with the webinar so it's not like 4 hours long. But do know that this experiment is available as a part of our experiment library. So if you finish this webinar and you go, oh, well, I would really love to see this finished, or I'd love to see the finished version, or I wonder how Devon made that, it's available in our experiment library. So if you go to support.pstnet.com, click on sign in the upper right hand corner, and then in the bottom, if you scroll down on the page a little bit, you should see a little section called experiment library, and you should see this this game of dice task in there as well. So so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add a few more instructions than we usually do to our tasks here. Usually I kind of make the instructions a little bare bones, but I feel like this task deserves a little bit more explanation, especially so the users know exactly what they're getting into. So the first thing I'm going to add to my experiment is a text display object that's just going to represent our basic instructions, just very basic. Hey, in this task you'll be betting, you're going to start with some money, those types of things. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this one from text display 1 to welcome, just because this is going to be essentially our welcome slide, but I'm going to add a few other objects that I'm going to use a little later too. I'm going to add another text display just after it, and this is going to be the explanation of how the betting is going to work. So I'm just going to call this bet instructions. And then I'm going to add a slide object just after that, and this is going to be the instructions on how to interact with the interface for the entirety of the task, just so the participants know ahead of time, hey, this is where you'll be doing all of the betting, and this is how you bet on each one of the objects. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this one here to, there we go, interface instruct. That way it's just instructions on how the interface works in ePrime. In the sample, they might be called something a little different, but the spirit of them are exactly the same. The functional part of them is going to be identical. So for instance, in the sample, I think our welcome screen is in fact called introduction. Identically the same, identical functions, those types of things. So for my welcome screen, what I'm just going to put is just a very basic welcome screen, just letting participants know about the task, just on a very high level. So I'll just type something like, welcome to the task. In this task, you will be betting on the result of a dice roll. You will start with $1,000, because I'm beginning this task, we're going to start the participant with some money, so they actually have some money to bet, and the highest bet that we have is $1,000, so they have enough money to make at least one of every type of bet, or at least one bet regardless of the type. $1,000 to bet on the dice. And then I'm going to say something like press space to see how the betting works. There we go. So now that I have my very simple text, I'm introducing participants to the task. They now know a little bit about what they're going to do, and we're going to get into a little bit of detail a little later about that. So if we click on the Properties page icon in the top left-hand corner here, and then click on that Duration Input tab, I'm going to change the duration of this object to infinite. If you've been following along with some of my other live streams, this is all going to look extremely similar to you. But I'm going to set my duration to infinite. I'm going to change my data logging here to time audit only, and I'm going to set my input mask here to keyboard, because that's what participants will be responding with during this object. My allowable is going to be set to space in this instance, and I'll keep correct the same, time limit and end action also the same. I'm going to go ahead and click apply and OK, because that's really all I need to change about this welcome screen. So now that I have my welcome screen, I need to write a little bit more text about the bet instructions. So bet instructions is going to be a little more complex because it's going to outline each type of bet they can make and whether or not they can win or lose that much money. So I'm going to say there will be four types of bets to make on the dice. The riskiest type of bet is to bet on, that is the word bed, there we go, is to bet on a single dice outcome. This pays $1,000. So if participants bet on a single dice, so they say this roll is going to be a 2 or this roll is going to be a 3, this is of course a riskiest type of bet and it's going to pay out the most. So it'll pay out $1,000. If you bet on a single dice outcome incorrectly, you will lose $1,000. So in this version of the task, the risk is equal to the reward. So it's going to pay out $1,000, but it will also it's going to pay out that $1,000, but they'll also potentially lose the $1,000 if they don't guess correctly. And then just go the next tier down. Whoops, let me spell the right. Next type of bet to make is on a pair of outcomes. There we go. Wow, spelling is hard today. This pays $500. So this is half of the risk. So instead of betting on a single dice, so saying, oh, one is gonna be rolled, 2 will be rolled, 3 will be rolled, those types of things. This is actually going to be a little different, where they're able to bet on a pair. So I can bet that it's going to be either 1 or 2, or either 3 or 4, those types of things. And then, like our last line, it's going to be extremely similar. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and just change a little bit on a pair of dice. And a pair of dice incorrectly, you will lose $500. There we go. So then the next one is going to be $200, and then we're obviously just increasing the number of dice. So if you bet on a single dice, it's 1,000. 2 dice, it is 500. 3 dice, it's going to be 200. Three possible outcomes. This pays $200. If you bet on 3 possible outcomes incorrectly, you will lose $200. There we go. And then our last type of bet is one of 4 possible dice. So you're going to bet that the dice roll will be either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 2, 3, 4, and 5, or 3, 4, 5, and 6. And this is, of course, the safest bet, but it also pays out the least. Oops. There we go. Outcomes. This pays $100. So, since it's the least risky, it also pays the least. You will lose $100. I'm going to say, try to earn as much money as possible. And then press space to see the interface. Now I'm doing this instead of the press space to continue those types of generic things. I'm doing the press space to see the interface, or press space to learn how betting works, because I know what's going to come up next, and it's going to be important that participants don't think they're going to jump right into the task right away. I want to make sure the participant is as comfortable as possible with all of the aspects of this task before they go ahead and begin the task, and that they know that they're going to be, oh, now I'm going to be trained on the interface. Oh, now I'm going to learn how the betting works, those types of things. Alright, so after we have this, let's go ahead and make the exact same edit that we made to the welcome to the properties of this object. So click on the properties page in the top left hand corner here, click on that duration input tab, and we're going to change the duration from 1000 milliseconds to infinite. Change that data logging there to time audit only, just so we know how long the participants were on this screen. I'm going to go ahead and click on add a keyboard input mask, and I'm going to make an allowable object here, space. Going to go ahead and click apply and OK, and then that is all I need for this slide or this text display object. So now let's actually teach them about the interface. So for that, we're going to be importing some images that I had made previously. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this interface instruct slide object. And the first thing I want to do is I want to actually add a little bit of text to this object, just to let them know that this is the interface that we'll be responding with. So I'll add that text display at the top. And I'm actually just going to make this kind of like a banner along the very top of the text of the slide object there. So I'm going to make it as wide as the slide object, and then I'm just going to go ahead and start typing text. So below is an example of the interface of the betting interface. To place a bet, simply click on the corresponding dice. I'll put die or dice because you can possibly select one of them. So now what I want to do is I want to actually import an image of my interface here. And it's just going to be an image that I had taken earlier. I'll show you here. I actually have them in this little folder here. It's called Game of Dice. I even have a finished version of the task here. Just like I said, because I'll be importing some parts of that into this experiment because it will take a while. Just to show you some of the resources I have this this image here called interface. You guys will be getting this as well. I want to open this with photos, of course. You guys will be receiving this as well, but this is what the interface is going to end up looking like. So there'll be a place your bet now screen here. It'll let you know what round you're on, how much money you have, and then here are all of the dice for you to click on, and then what their potential payoffs will be. So that 1,000 to bet on a single dice, there's going to be 500 to bet on one of a pair of dice. There's going to be 200 that pays off on either one of those, and then there's this 100 that pays off on one of a possible combination of 4. Then I have this little banner running across the side here that lets participants know that these two are the high risk conditions, but high reward conditions. And these two down here are the low risk, low reward conditions. And what we're going to be varying per object is going to be a little different than some of the other experiments that I've done too, which is kind of cool about this task. A lot of the other experiments that we've done, we've actually made sweeping changes to every single slide object that we've seen. So the feedback is in this big, this really big place, and the feedback is the entire screen, and then the fixation's the entire screen. Everything that's going to change about this experiment is actually just going to change this little top portion here. The whole remainder of the objects are going to be exactly the same. It's pretty cool. So that's the one object that I have. Then I have these dice images, which are literally just my images of my dice. So as you can see here, I have the individual ones, and they show up a little bigger in Windows Explorer. But I have my individual dice, and I have my pairs of dice, and I have my 3 dice and 4 dice. And then that's just all dice. That's an image that I'm actually not using. And then we have Dice Movie. So these are images these are movies that I actually took here in the office of me rolling dice. So if there are official Game of Dice videos, these are not the official Game of Dice videos. These are just the ones that I had made in the office. And then I have a folder here of old filler movies just before I made these. But they're relatively unremarkable dice rolling movies. There, I rolled a 6. So these are the images the movies that we're going to be loading into the task, and this is also pretty cool too because these movies are actually .mts files, which is a file format that we don't commonly use, but do get a lot of questions about in ePrime. A lot of people do ask, are MTS files compatible with ePrime, and they are, and I'm going to be demonstrating that today. All right, so now that it says below as an example of the interface, I want to actually add that picture of that interface that I have. So to do that, I'm going to add a slide image subobject, and I'm going to just click on the slide object here to add it. And I'm going to expand it to make it a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to go ahead and import some of the properties. So I click on the slide subobject properties page. Keep in mind that this properties page will show the properties for any object that appears just to its left. So in this case, image 1, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to change a few of the properties. So first I'm going to go into file name here, and I'm going to open it. And here are all my possible files, and in this case I want interface. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on interface and click apply and see what that looks like. Now if you notice, this is another error that we see pretty commonly in ePrime. I'm loading an image, but I only see a small part of the image. And then if I want to show the entire image, I have to make this slide subobject almost as big as the entire screen. which I want to fit all this text and stuff on there, so I can't actually do that. So what I should do, or what I would recommend doing if you are running into this issue, is go ahead and make the slide subimage or slide image subobject exactly how big, or exactly as big as you want it on the screen. Don't worry about the image yet, just worry about the space it's going to fill up. Then hop back into its properties page and change this stretch property here from no to yes. And then click apply and look what happens. Now it fits that area and I can see the entirety of the image without seeing just a small middle portion of it. When I was an undergraduate, this property here, the stretch property, actually took my entire lab about a week to find. So hopefully you guys avoid that and are following along here too. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK because that's really all I need out of that. And then I'm going to add another text display object, another slide text sub object to the very bottom of this just to give a little bit more information here. So I'm just going to resize this so it is just below. So I'm just going to say, remember, all bets, I'll just say something. First I want to instruct them on how to bet. So, oh no, I said to place your bet, simply click on the corresponding die or dice. Perfect. So now I have my little remember thing I hear. So remember, all bets are final. So choose carefully. And then I will say, press next to begin. There we go. Press next to begin. So the reason I said all bets are final is because if you look at the interface here, I don't necessarily have like a next button or a roll dice button or anything like that. The dice rolling is actually going to begin once the participant presses any one of the dice there. So once a participant makes a bet, it's just going to launch right into the dice roll, and then at that point there's really no going back. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear in my instructions here. And I'll go ahead and space that out just a little bit more so the next is down there. So now it says, now if you notice in my instructions I say press next to begin. I actually want that to be a button instead of just continuing to press space. And the reason I'm switching from space to button for this particular object is that this entire task can be performed on a touch screen or with a mouse. And I want participants to get used to being able to click on this screen before the task actually starts. So I don't think they have to type something on the keyboard or anything like that. So in order to make that next button, all I need to do is really interact with just one of the button properties. So to do that, I'm going to add a slide button to my slide object here by clicking on the slide button subobject button, for lack of a better word, on the left-hand side of the screen. And then I'm just going to add it to the bottom right-hand corner of my slide, because that's where I want it anyway. Right now it just says button, so I'm going to go ahead and situate that however I want, and then I'm just going to change the text on it. It's fine that it's gray like that. I really don't care. It's going to look good on this screen anyway. So I'm going to keep that to button, and then I'm going to click on this sub-object properties page button at the top there. Now as far as the response is concerned, it can say button 1 in my response, and I'm completely fine with that. The name of it can continue to be button 1. We are going to change the name and properties, or name and response properties in the future slides that we have, but for now we can keep these all at default. For now I'm going to click on theme and then go to text under the theme. And I'm just going to change the text here from the word button to the word next. That way I know that now there's that next button that I had mentioned in this object here. So now participants are going to be on this screen until they click the next button, and I have to actually edit those properties. So to do that, let's click on the properties page in the top left-hand corner of that slide object and click on that duration input tab. Now right now this is actually just going to be on the screen for 1,000 milliseconds and then it'll move on. But I want participants to be able to see it and kind of look at the interface that they'll be using here and understand what each part of it is. So I'm actually going to change the duration here from 1,000 to infinite. And change my data logging in this case to standard. That way I get I get the logged response of that button press in my data file. And I'm going to add add an input mask. Now I almost messed up and said keyboard input mask because that's what we did for welcome and bet instructions, but they'll be clicking on that next button. So I'm going to actually add a button input mask this time. Now the button input mask you can see is an allowable of that little, it's a little star character or a wildcard character, depending on how computer savvy you are. That wildcard character actually represents any click on any button that's on this slide. So if I had 8 buttons on the slide, and I'm going to very soon, you'll see. I'm going to have like 8 buttons on the slide. It's going to be a click to any one of the single buttons. And in this case, I only have one, and it's that next button, so I'm going to keep it the way it is. I'm going to go ahead and click Apply and OK. There. So now that I have all of this set up, they're ready to begin their task. So I'm going to actually put this task in a trial list that's within a block list. For those of you who follow along on my other webinars or my other live streams, this will be a very familiar structure for you. For those of you it's going to look who are new, it's going to look a little silly. And the reason it looks a little silly is just because the block list is going to be extremely empty. There's not actually going to be anything inside it. The reason I'm adding the block list is so we can edit this later to add more trials. So if I want a practice version of the task that doesn't include money, and then they have the money later so they're not messing around with the interface, that's going to be really easy for me to add. It just makes expanding upon the experiments so much easier and so much faster. So I'm going to go ahead and add a list object here just after my interface instruct slide object, and I'm going to rename this one to block list. Now I'm calling it block list because it's a list object that's going to be making a procedure called block proc. Like I said, the list is going to be empty. Block proc is going to be pretty empty for now, but know that we put it there for two main reasons. The one main reason is that it makes it really easy to scale the experiment and makes it really easy to create other conditions if you're doing a within or between subjects design. And it also makes it easy to take a look at the data later, because if you click on this experiment object up here and go to data file, you'll see that we have our experiments already structured into session, block, and trial levels, and we want to kind of maintain that consistency there. So we're going to go ahead and click OK, and then now that we're in our block list, we just need to make that block level, or that block proc that I was talking about earlier. In order to make that, all you have to do is just type the word block proc into that procedure column. Go ahead and click OK, or hit enter. It'll say doesn't exist. Would you like to create it? Go ahead and take a look at the little structure window there. You see this little question mark. If you click yes, you see it turns into one of our procedure objects. So that's exactly what we need to do. And it says, would you like to make this procedure the default value for newly created levels? Sure. It doesn't really matter. We're not adding anything else to it anyway. So I'm going to close out of all my windows now and go into my block proc. Now, like I said, the block proc is also going to look a little silly because the only thing that we have on it is going to be our trial list object. And the trial list is going to perform an identical function to this block list, such that it is actually just going to prove to make another level, but we're actually going to fill it with a little bit more information. So let's go ahead and make our trial list just by dragging the list object from our toolbox here onto the block proc. I'm going to right click to rename, and I'm going to call this one trial list and hit enter here. I'm going to double click on it to open it in the interface, and then like I said, I'm actually just going to start importing some values over just to make it a little easier here. So in our block list, or in our trial list, my apologies, really it's going to be a little bit more blank than some of the other trial lists. If you've been following along with a lot of these webinars, you know that sometimes we really pack a lot of information to this trial list. But this task, despite being really cool looking and honestly kind of fun, doesn't really have too many independent variables and doesn't have too much that really changes on a per trial basis. So we're really only manipulating one thing. So as far as the procedure is concerned, we're going to call this procedure trial proc. And hit enter. It does not exist. I would like to make it, and I would like to make this a default value for newly created levels. And then in trial list, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more. Attribute here, and this one's just going to be called roll movie. Now this is just going to be the movies that I had mentioned before of me rolling the dice. So if you look into here, you see that I've named them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And those just represent the outcome of the dice, because I think it's important to know when you're programming this task what the outcome of the video is going to be. So for roll movie, I'm just going to put 1 for now. So now that I have 1, I need to put the rest of them in there. So I'm going to add 5 more levels to my list object to account for each and every one of my movies. And I'm going to go ahead and do that by clicking add multiple levels, and I'm going to add 5. And now for each level or each trial, I'm going to have a different movie appear. There we go. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now keep in mind that I'm referencing these particular slide movies. When I reference them, they're actually in a subfolder, and I'll show you that right now. So here's my subfolder here. This is my experiment. I actually just called it Game of Dice Stream, so it's the stream version of it. I have Game of Dice Stream, and then the movies are located in this subfolder called Dice Movie, and are called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then because of my file extension here, they're actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. .mts. And I'll be adding all of that information later. But for now, I kind of want this roll movie to be as clean as possible, because this is something I can then look at in my data file. And instead of seeing this long movie pathway, I just see a nice and clean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as the movie that participants were seeing, or participant saw. So now that I've done that, I want to make a few changes to the way that ePrime presents this information to users. Because right now, if you look at the way that my task is set up, I actually have 6 samples, which makes sense. It's running through each one of the dice once, but it's going in sequential selection, which isn't random and is going to totally skew the participant's bet, because I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 in that order. Now, obviously, the thing that I want to do is I want to randomize it, but we're actually going to use an almost little-known feature of randomization. And I'm going to, or at least little used in my experience, and I'm going to click on the Properties page icon to do that. And now in the Selection tab, I'm actually going to change the order here from sequential, not to random, but to random with replacement. Now the reason that I'm choosing random with replacement over random is the exact opposite that I want random for all of the other trials, or all the other experiments that I made. Random with replacement, once you've selected one of the options from the list, or once it's selected one of the options from the list, then puts it back into the pool of possible selected movies again. So this is going to be, or act more like a real dice roll in real life, because if I had selected random instead of random with replacement, what it would do is, for example, it would roll the dice and it would show a 2. Then it would never show a 2 again. It would say, okay, I've shown my 2, I'm going to move on and possibly select 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And that's not how dice rolls work at all. Dice rolls can be, are completely random, and I could have the possibility of having 2 2s appear in a row, or 2 3s appear in a row, or roll a 2 and then roll a 4 and then roll a 2 again. So in this case, to simulate that realistic dice roll, I'm actually going to have random with replacement set. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to go to my Reset Exit tab. This lets us know how many times I'm going through this list. And right now, showing each movie possibly once, but only having 6 trials, I don't think it's enough. And in fact, if you looked at my interface, I kind of spoil the rest of this. But if you look in that interface image, I actually said that there were 18 trials. So what I would do is then I would say exit list after 3 cycles of 18 trials. So 3 times 6 is 18. 3 cycles equals 18 samples. So it's actually going to run through this list 3 separate times, and it's going to be randomly picking and choosing which movie which movie appears, regardless of whether that movie's appeared before or not. And that's going to give that extra level of randomization that we need to be a more accurate dice rolling simulator. All right. So now that we've made the trial list, we have our roll movie here, we need to actually get into probably the most complicated part of this task. Because keep in mind, this task does involve script, but the scripting of it is actually pretty easy. The part of it that's actually going to be the most difficult, and that actually took me the longest time to make, is this interface, believe it or not. Because this interface uses a couple of properties and a couple of features that are pretty seldom used in ePrime, honestly, or not, if not seldom used, that are a little less prevalent. So I'm going to go ahead and make a slide object here as the first part of my trial proc, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to go ahead and rename this one to PlaceBet. So basically, for this PlaceBet object, I'm going to be making this exact interface right here. And if you notice, these, it's a cool looking interface, but there's a lot of stuff going on here. So if you look, I have these individual rows for each one of my possible dice bets, just so it's very clear, you're clicking on this die, this is what, or this possible bet, this is the outcome of it. And it looks like there's a border all the way around all of it. This is actually made by using something that we call Z-order in ePrime. And I'll show you how to use Z-order. So if you look at this interface here, and I'll actually just pull up the image just to demonstrate what I'm working from, because I was kind of making the images up, or this interface up, as I went along, and was obviously basing it off of the real task. But since I was making this up as I go along, I'm going to kind of use this as a reference now because I have it. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to make this box, because this was definitely the most complicated part of it. Each one of these dice here actually represents a different button in ePrime that participants can click. And the value of the button is going to determine how much they win or lose. And then if you look, each of these is surrounded by a column, or a row here, a little row box that I had made. And then all of this down here is encompassed in a larger box. So the first thing I need to do, and I need to think about this property, is called that Z-order property. And that's the order in which these objects appear in ePrime. And this is really important when you're doing a more complex visual task like this. And the reason that this is important is because whenever I add an object to E prime, and I'll show you this here, I add an object to E prime. When I add a new object to E prime, that one appears over top of the previous item. And then if I want to, I can go to this order property here, and that order property can either be accessed by clicking on it and clicking on the properties page here, or simply just right-clicking on the object. You can see order here, and I can either choose to bring it to the front or send it to the back. So if I send it to the back, now you're going to see that this text display has priority over this image display that's now in the back. And generally speaking, it's not too complicated of a method to keep in mind, but do note that on my image here, I have at least 3 layers. I have a layer that represents this big, large background that I have. Then I have another layer on top of that that represents the column that I'm putting the buttons in, or the dice in. And then on the topmost layer of this, or the topmost of the Z order, I have these buttons. So that's the order that I have to actually build things in, is I have to think bottom up and start building from the bottom and then working to the top. So the first thing I want to do is make this large border around it. Now to do that, I'm actually going to get rid of these. To do that, all I did was add a text display object and just make it the size of the screen that I want. And this is going to end up being more of a visual kind of thing, and whatever looks good for you in relation to your screen size. Particularly for this task, we don't recommend setting that match desktop resolution at runtime to yes, because I mean, if you run this at a different resolution, these objects are going to look different. And if you notice here, a lot of things are very, very carefully spaced. And you're going to lose all of that very careful spacing if you change the image resolution. So we do recommend keeping that property to know if you're doing a task like this. Now, to make just a border around everything, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete the word text in this text display object, just so it looks like a blank white background. And I'm going to click on the properties page object, or the properties page for this particular object. Now I'm going to go to frame, and the only thing I'm going to change here is this border width property. Right now it's set to 0. I'm going to change it to 2. Let me see here. There we go. Change that to 2 and click apply and OK. And that's where I get my kind of background border. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make each of those individual columns that I have here that are going to hold each one of my dice. So to do that, I'm actually just going to take another text display object. Remember, since we're keeping in mind that Z order, it's just going to show up right on top of this one. And I'm going to add another border to this one. So again, just go to the properties page for this object, go to frame, change border width to 2, and hit apply and OK. Now I need to resize this so I can fit 4 of them wide, or sorry, 4 of them across this way. So I need to go ahead and resize this one. And then of course I will change this text to blank. Now what I could do is I could spend a lot of time trying to replicate the size of this object and make another text display and then go, oh, is it the right size? Is it off by a couple pixels? I could also hop into the properties page here, go to the frame tab, and memorize all of these values, particularly the height and width and the Y or the X property here, and make sure that that's correct. Or what I can do that's even easier is just click on it once, or this slide text sub object once, click Control C, and then click Control V. Now, at first glance, it looks like nothing happened, but watch what happens when I move this down. We're right there. You'll see that E prime actually ended up making a copy of that first object literally right over top of it. And that's kind of how E prime works when it makes copies of things. It actually will paste it right over top of the object. So I want to do that one more time. I'm going to do Control C and Control V. Control C to copy, Control V to paste. Down just a little bit more. And then I'm going to add one more. It's going to go right underneath, and it looks like I ran out of space there. So what I can do is just resize this. Like I said, this is probably the most involved part of this task, is just making this interface. I'm going to kind of make a quick and dirty version of it right here, just so I'm not spending all of my time resizing this thing and resizing all the aspects of it. But just know that the finished version of this product is available on our experiments library, so you can get that whenever you want. Okay, so now that I have this, I'm going to add one of the most important parts of this, which is the dice to which participants are responding. So what I'm doing is I'm just actually adding a button object. So each button is going to represent a different die. Because if you notice in the interface here, the top one has 6 possible die for participants to choose. Now, in order to load this and make those look like actual dice instead of a button object, I need to change a few of this button object's properties. And I'm going to do that by clicking on the properties page icon here. And I'm going to go over to the theme. Now, I am, like I said, going to change the name and response properties just a second. But for now, I'm going to keep it like this. So I'm going to go to the text tab first, and I'm actually going to get rid of all of the text on this object. I definitely don't need it. And I'm also going to go to the background. Now, the background is what makes that a little gray square like that with that little beveled edges. That's what this background is what's loading that image. So I'm actually going to get rid of this one as well. And if I click apply, it's going to look like there's nothing there. So now we just need to load an image. So I'm going to click on image and then find my file. Because keep in mind, this is going to be a very consistent file. This file name isn't going to change at all. So all I do is then just go to my dice images subfolder and find the one dice. And you see here it's dice images /1.jpg. That's just how you would reference that image there. And I'm going to click apply and OK. And as you can see, I have the same issue that I did before with that interface, where I can only see the very center of that dice, or of that die. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into theme, go to image, and change that stretch property to yes. There you go. And now we have a little dice, or a single die there. And I want to resize that just a little bit so it looks, more like the shape of a die. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing I did to these slide image sub-objects here. And instead of having to do all of that editing again, I'm actually just going to Control-C on my button object and Control-V. And then just move that over. Control-V again. 4, 5, and 6. So I'll space those out just a little bit better because right now they're all kind of the same. And the only thing that I need to change about these now, just to get them to look right, are the images I load into them. So I'll click on the properties page for the next one, go to theme, go to image, and the image for this one is of course going to be number 2. And the image for this one will be number 3. Make that same edit. Just find our number 3 there. And then 4. There you go, there's 4. And then 5. And then the last one here, which is of course 6. There we go, and 6. Perfect. There. So now we have all of our single die selections here, and then the only thing I need to do is place the value of the bet just off to the right. So I'll take another text display object, and it's going to be comically large right there, and I'll just go ahead and resize that so it's a much more manageable size. Right there looks good. And then I'm actually just going to rename this one to $1,000. Or not rename it, but change the text to $1,000. So now participants know that any bets made to this row are going to be a $1,000 win or loss, depending on the result. Now I'm going to do something very, very similar for the bottom row, and I'm just going to show you how that works, because then the same concept kind of gets old. Then okay, well, Devon does this, Devon does this, Devon does this, and that was a little, it was a little repetitive getting into here. So I'll just go ahead and add this row, and then I'm going to add another version from my experiment that I have over there, just to show you guys exactly what I was doing to get that. So I'm going to add another button object here, and I'm going to resize this one. So what I want to do here is I'm actually trying to now load those 2 dice images that I have. Not there, it's actually right here. So if I go into my dice images, here I'm trying to load this, like this one, I'm trying to load 1, 2 into this one. So in order to make this look right, what I had done is gone into the properties page for this one and taken a look at the width property for this dice, or for this particular die. This is 7. So what I want to do is I want to change the width property for this button to be double that. So in this case it'll be 14. So now it'll be the exact width of 2 of my my dice there. Click apply. I'll go into theme. Text is of course not going to be button. My background is, of course, not going to be the same background. Like I said, these are going to be almost identical edits. But this time, instead of loading 1, I am actually just going to load 2 of them. So go to my dice images, and then I will get that one too. So apply and OK. And I'd forgotten the stretch property. So go back into theme, go to image, and then change stretch to yes. In case you were wondering, that inherit property that I keep accidentally clicking on, that is inheriting from the theme editor, which you can find right here, and is inheriting from that parent theme of base button. If you have any questions about that, I actually go through this really in depth in one of the ePrime 3 update videos, so I do strongly recommend taking a look at that. But aside from that, we'll go ahead and click apply and OK. And now we have that, and the dice are basically the exact same size, which is exactly what we want. We'll just change that height there. And if you want, you can actually go into these and double check that height. Height for this one is 8%, so let's make the height 8% for this one as well. No, height is 8%, so we are perfect. So then now, all I would have to do is just do the exact same thing, copy and paste over and over and over. But like I said, I can always import this from another experiment, so I'm going to kind of spare you those details. I'll walk you through how I'm doing that and what changes I'm making though. So what I'm going to do now that let's pretend, have all of my dice here, is I want to actually change the responses that are being made to each one of the die. So to each one of these possible bets. So if I look at the properties page here, you'll see that clicking on this particular die as my bet is going to return button 1 as the .resp for this. Now that's not particularly ideal because I do need to start processing those responses a little later to determine the participant's potential potential earnings or losses. So for responses, I'm actually going to call this one 1. And in this case, I'm going to call this one here 2. And I'm going to do this for every single one of my possible answers. So there's 3. And this one's going to be 4. This one will be 5. And this one will be 6. Now the way that I'm going to handle these multi-dice responses is I'm actually going to do the same kind of change, but I'm just going to kind of concatenate each one of those possible die. So in this case, I'm going to have I have 1 here and 2 here. This one that I'm editing right now is actually just going to be called 1, 2. And I'm going to do the exact same thing all the way across. So for my 3, 4 dice, they're going to look very similar. So this one will be 3, 4. There we go. And then all I need to do then is just reload the next image. There we go. And then 3, 4 is right there. There, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's going to keep going. So I'll have my 5, 6 over here as well. I'll probably want to put that in the center. And then I'll have my payoff down here, which will be, I just did Control C for that one as well. This one will be my $500 payoff row. All right, so like I said, that's actually going to take a long time, and just so you're not watching me do absolutely every aspect of this interface, what I am going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and delete what I have on here, and I'm going to pull all of that information from my already finished version over here. And I'll show you a lot of the changes that I made just to show you what I've been doing. So let's make sure I have everything. There you go. And all I'm doing is I have an open version of eStudio on the one screen over here. I go into here and click Control V, and then it should paste the objects between the two experiments. So as you can see here, it's kind of thinking a little bit because I am actually pasting quite a lot of objects. All right, so I'll switch over to that one. So I think I was actually one of the dangers of this is trying to copy and paste too many objects at the same time. There we go. So I actually ended up trying to copy and paste way too many objects all at once. So what I am going to do is I'm actually just going to, there we go, we'll retry and it goes away. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to add them one at a time then. But it'll be much easier, or add them just a few at a time, just so I can show you guys what I had done here. So while that opens, the next thing that I want to, so while that's opening, I do want to note that the one thing that I do need to add to this still is inline script. And the reason I'm going to add inline script is because we need to actually track two different things in inline script. We need to track what trial we're on, because we're going to be actively updating the trial. So if you take a look here, I'm actually keeping track of what round participants are on. And I'm actually going to be actively updating I'm going to be actively tracking how much money they're earning or losing based on their response. So to do that, before I make any of these visual edits again, I'm going to go into the user script, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add 2 different variables to my user script. Now I'm adding these variables or defining them in the user script because that's actually where the entirety of the experiment can access them. It's called user script. If you're familiar with programming, it's best to think of it as kind of a global function or a globally defined variable. So I'm going to go ahead and make one, and this one is just going to be called endResult. So endResult is where I'm going to track just the results of my dice rolls. And then I have another one, and it's just going to be called trial counter. There we go. So some of my other program came up, which is perfect. And I'm actually going to change this endResult as well, because that's going to be another variable for later. I'll just call this one endBalance. Now, if I'm as I mentioned in the welcome screen here, it says my beginning balance is going to be $1,000. So now that I have it set here and I have a variable that's going to track how much my balance is, I want to actually define that $1,000 and essentially give participants that $1,000 at the beginning of the task. So I'm going to add an inline object to the very, very beginning here, and this one is just going to be called init. I'm calling it init. It's like initializing. It's essentially just paying them $1,000. So to do that, I'm just going to take that endBalance variable that I had made. Whoops. There we go. And in my inline object here, I'm just going to put endBalance equals 1,000. So now participants start off with $1,000. So if you're building this task, or if you have this task from the experiment library and want to change how much participants start out with, you would just change this part of the interface. So if you want them to start off with 500, or if you want them to start off with 5,000, if you're super generous, you can do that. But since we're just starting them off with 1,000, we'll keep it at 1,000. All right, so now let's go ahead and start editing that place bet slide object. And now I'm going to actually just copy a few objects at a time. So first, I want to go ahead and set some text display objects on the screen. If you notice from the interface, I have these high risk, low risk, and winning probability. Let's go ahead and add those. And again, I added those just by a simple copy paste. And ePrime's just taking a second here. And then once we go ahead and add those, we'll start adding the rest of the components of this place bet slide object. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. So actually what I'm doing here is, instead of just the individual objects on the screen, I'll just drag and drop them. And I'll go ahead and delete this one, which is my blank one. And now if we take a look at the finished version here, we can see, there we go. So this is what I was making before. I was making each one of these individual die, and then I was making these pairs, and finally the 3 and the 4. So if you look here, my image object that I have right here, my image, is just dice images /1, 2, 3, and then if you look in my general tab here, my response is 1, 2, 3, just keeping in line with that trend that I had made with the 1 dice, the 2 dice, and the 3 dice. And then the rows of 4 are also going to be the same. They'll be 1, 2, 3, 4 for that response. And for the image, I'm loading 1234.jpg. So it's going to look extremely similar. So just kind of think of this as a sped up version of what I did there. And then adding these text display objects were very easy. This is all they are. They're just slide text subobjects. And I just put the words winning probability, high risk, and low risk in here. The difference here is that my border color, or my border, is actually a 4-point border instead of a 2-point border. If you like to change this to 2 just to maintain consistency, that's entirely up to you. I think it looks good with a 4-point border, so that's why I added that. Again, that's all strictly aesthetic. That's all something that I wanted to change. And then all I did here was I have another text display object that says place your bet now. So this is the screen to which participants will be responding. And then if you notice here, I have two attribute references in here that I haven't actually set. So I have one called R number, which is going to represent the number of round that we're on, and one called balance, and I'm referencing a variable called an attribute called balance. Now, the reason why I added all that script before adding the rest of this is because now we have a sense of where we're getting that R number and that balance attribute from. And since we're referencing them on this slide, we need to actually make an inline object before it that sets these values. So I'm going to take an inline object and put it just before my place bet here. And this one's just going to be called set values, because we'll be setting two values. We're going to be setting the R number value here to represent the number of the round that we're on, and we're going to be setting the balance here to represent how much participants have. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reference this trial counter. So trial counter is set up here, but you notice I didn't do anything with it in init, because I'm actually going to be incrementing it in this set values inline object. So I will say trial counter equals, trial counter plus 1. So it's just a very simple math function. All I'm doing is just adding or incrementing the trial counter by 1 every time E prime gets here. And then the way that I would reference that and make that value appear on this slide object in the place of R number is just do a very simple c.setAttrib statement. So I just do c.setAttrib. And what you saw there was script sense. I've done this quite a bit, so I worked through it kind of quickly, I know. But what you do is you do, if you type c dot, E prime is going to fill in a list of possible things to come after C. And if you start typing setAttrib, it actually highlights it. Instead of having to fill out the entire rest of the script, you just hit enter and it'll fill that out for you. And then if you click on this this quotation mark here, which is the next necessary part of the c.setAttrib statement, you're going to see that E prime is going to make recommendations for what attribute you should put there. But we are actually going to make a new one called R number. And we're going to set that equal to the value of trial counter. So now whenever participants get to that place bet, they're actually going to end up getting the value of that trial counter. And then the only other thing I need to do is I need to make this balance attribute reference as well. So I'm going to do c.setAttrib, and then balance. And that's going to be equal to that nBalance variable that I set up here. Now that value is going to change, definitely, throughout the trial. But for now, we would like it to first show the value that we set here for the very first task. So that's why I'm setting it here to this this attribute, but I'm not actually manipulating it here, and we're going to manipulate it a little later. So the next part, now that we have our set values and we have our place bet, and there is one more important part of place bet I want to show you, and that's how they're actually clicking on these dice. How they're doing that is clicking on the properties page here and going to duration input tab. You'll notice my duration is set to infinite, my data logging is set to standard, and my input mask here is a button device. And I have my allowable, again, just set to any possible click that they make. And if you notice, I'm only letting them click on one possible dice. That way, or that's why in my interface instruct I said that all bets are final. So you make a bet, you're locked in, you can't move on anymore. Alright, so now after I have my place bet, I need to actually start determining whether they've won or lost. And this is going to be done entirely via inline script. So I'm going to take an inline object and I'm going to put it just after my place bet there. And I am going to rename this one to place bet without that one there. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this because it's kind of involved. It's kind of a big inline script, but I'll show you exactly what I'm doing in it. So scroll all the way to the top. The first thing we're doing is something called a select case statement. I don't think it's something that I've really covered in these live streams too much before. But a select case statement is what you would use if you have something like if you want to do an if-then statement, but you have a lot of possible outcomes. So if you notice here, I'm doing a select case statement on placebet.resp. And if you look on my placebet object, you can see there's a lot of possible responses for my participants. So if I look here in my placebet.resp, I have a case for every single possible response they could make. I have case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are all those single dice all the way at the top. And if you notice, I'm referencing these by just like 6 in curly brackets, 5 in curly brackets. Now the way that I know that the button is going to return one of these possible responses and not some other weird combination of responses in E' is by going to my button object and taking a look at this line right here. It says responses reported by the slide button shall report, and then it's going to tell me exactly what the .resp value is going to be if participants click on this button. So now that I know that it's 1, I can have a select case statement in this instance, so if they click 1. So I actually do that, and this is just every so often I'll have one of these select case statements here in the script, and I have one for every possible button. So here's my 1, 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here are my groups of 3. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then my groups of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then at the very end I have a select case statement. Now, if you notice, I also have another part to my script that I haven't talked about. Not only do I have those select case statements, and I've actually lined them all up with this indent, but one indent further, I have an if then and else statement. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking a look at the participants' responses. So let's say participant pressed 1, because this is the one that I'm highlighting right now. Let's say participants pressed 1 to place bet. Now E prime is going to move into this if then statement. And they're going to take a look at the value of that roll movie attribute. So they're going to say, okay, they clicked on 1, is roll movie 1? Because that means they're going to win money. So if roll movie is 1, then that means end balance, which is that variable that I had made to keep track of participants' balance, is going to equal its current value plus 1,000, because that means they've won $1,000. And I'm going to change the active state of my outcome slide object, which I haven't added just yet, and I totally will, but just know that I'm going to have a little bit of feedback afterwards for participants. Otherwise, so this else statement is just like saying if they click anything else. That way I don't have to sit there and say, or that means that any other movie showed up. So, if they clicked on 1 and 1 shows up, 1 was the movie, then they obviously win money. But now I don't have to make different if-then clauses for every single other movie that's possible, because I obviously have 5 other movies. And that's going to make this inline object grow really, really big, really, really fast. So I'm going to do else statement to say if 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 show up as the movie, then of course they bet incorrectly. So the value of that end balance is going to be decreased by 1,000 right here. And then that outcome object that I'm going to add very soon is going to show that lose state. And then I'm setting my result here. So the result is how much I won or lost, and it's going to be 1,000. And this is going to be more obvious what that result attribute is on my next slide object that I add. But if you notice, I just do that for every single condition. So if roll movie is 2, and they responded with 2, then they are correct and they get $1,000. Man, I wish that's how life really worked. We have this select case 1 or 2. No, obviously this one's going to change a little bit. If you notice, my if then has grown just a little bit more. So my if then used to be just a single clause. So if roll movie equals 6, in this case it's going to be if roll movie equals 1, or if the roll movie equals 2, because right now I'm clicking on that 1, 2 button, so either one of those conditions would make it win. So my end balance is actually going to be end balance plus 500 instead of 1,000, but I'm still going to that win state and that lose state, and my result now reflects how much they're either winning or losing. And that of course changes for that 1, 2, 3. So you can see now I have 3 statements here. I have if roll movie is 1, if roll movie is 2, or if roll movie is 3. And then I have the same thing for 4, 5, and 6. And then this actually grew a little bit more for that 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if roll movie is 1, 2, 3, or 4, then the win state, then my end balance equals end balance plus 100, and my active state is win state. Otherwise, I subtract 100, and my active state is lose state. So that's just the script that I'm adding. Like I said, it's a little bit much, and it would have been really boring to watch me kind of type out, but that's just kind of processing 2 different things. It's processing what participants clicked on, and it's processing the current value of that movie there. All right, so now that I have that, the next thing that I need to add to my experiment is actually going to be the movie that they see. So this one's just going to be called Dice Roll, and it's going to look extremely similar to this one. In fact, it's going to look so similar, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this, I did that by clicking Control-C, and pasting it. So it's going to be called PlaceBet1, because what I want is I want all of these objects to remain the same. The only thing that I want to change is this little box in the top left corner. That's the only thing that's going to be actively updating throughout this task. So I'm going to go ahead and change my change PlaceBet1. I'm going to rename that one just to Dice Roll. There we go. And I'm going to double click on it, and of course it is going to look extremely similar. So like I said, I want all of this to look the same. I don't want participants to actively click on anything though. So since they're not actively clicking on anything, I want to go ahead and click on this properties page icon in the top left corner. I'm going to keep the duration to infinite, and I'm going to show you why, but I'm going to do something that's that seems a little risky in ePrime, and I'm going to remove the input mask. So right now, this object is set for an infinite duration, and there's no way to get off of it. I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to click Apply and OK. And I'm going to remove this text display object. And instead, I'm going to add a movie display object. So this is where I'm actually going to load those videos of me rolling the dice. And I'll resize it just so it's a little closer to before. And I'm going to go ahead and save that quickly, just to make sure that my change is applied. So now, if you remember, I have this attribute here called roll movie, and the movie is going to be updating on a per trial basis. So in order to load a movie into this, it wouldn't make any sense for me to go into this subfolder and click on each and every one of these movies, because that way, that's not going to load that way. So what I want to do instead is I want to actually reference each of the movies that I have in this Dice Movies folder. So to reference a subfolder in ePrime, all I do is type Dice Movies / and then I'm getting the name of the video from that attribute reference called roll movie. So I would do a square attribute reference there, or a little square bracket for an attribute reference, call it roll movie, and then end the attribute reference with that end bracket. And now all I need to do is just put the extension of the movie just after it. And I keep clicking on the wrong button here. There you go to Properties, and then this is just a .mts file. So all I have to do then, get rid of that, all I have to do is go into here and just put .mts, and that's going to concatenate that onto the end of the movie there. So now it'll say Dice Movies, and then whatever movie's coming up, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, .mts. And I would like to stretch this one as well. Now what I'm going to do then is I'm going to actually change this property here called End Movie Action. This lets you determine what happens to the slide object whenever the movie's done playing. Now this is why I set the duration to infinite, and I'm willing to be okay with that, because if I can set end movie action here to terminate, it's actually going to end the slide object whenever that movie is done playing. And that's going to be exactly what I want in this case. It's going to end the movie whenever it's done playing and move on to the feedback. Because I already placed my bet, I'm watching the dice roll, so this is like the most tense part of it, and then I just need my feedback. So for the feedback, I'm actually just going to import that from my other experiment since we are running low on time. And that's going to be that outcome slide object that I had talked so much about. There we go. So outcome. And if you look, outcome is going to look extremely similar. There's going to be kind of two major changes. Now the first and most obvious change is right here. So this is where the feedback is going to happen, because I want the feedback, the movie, and the place your bets right now to all happen in the same visual space on my slide object. That's just the way the task is laid out, and I just like that it's kind of its own little window there. I think it's really cool looking, honestly. But it says, congratulations, you've won, and then a $sign, and then a reference to an attribute that I had made called result. Now, if you remember when I was explaining my inline, result is actually being set in every single if-then statement based on whether or not, or based on the level that they bet on. So if they're betting on this row, then the result is going to be 1,000, it's going to be 500, 200, and 100. And if you were thinking while I was walking through this, well, why didn't I put negative 100 here? Why didn't I put, positive 100 here? That's because if you look at the way that my outcome is, this just says you've won, and then just that number. Now, if you've been taking a look at the bottom part of this slide, you'll notice I have two states, and I actually reference this in script a little bit as well. I have something called win state and something called lose state. So if participants won money, they're going to see this one. It looks really nice. It's blue. It says congratulations. If participants don't win, they're going to see this. It says too bad, you've lost, and then that result there. And that's why I didn't put negative, because if you say you've lost to negative $100, it sounds like you're getting $100 or something like that. So I just have you've lost and then that result in an attribute reference there as well. And the only thing I'm changing between these two slide objects, and I actually really like doing this just to see differences, is clicking between those two. You just see that I'm changing this slide text sub object. And those properties that I changed to get it to look like that, I just input my text. And then if you look here into the fore color, I changed the fore color to white, and fore color honestly just represents the font color in a slide text sub object. And that back color is the background color, and I changed that one to blue. And then I just did something very similar to this one. So I actually kept the fore color at its default value of black, but changed the back color to red. And that's really the only change I made to this. And if you look at the duration input tab, you can see that right now it's currently set to 1,000 milliseconds. and nothing else. It's not even logging data. We don't really necessarily care about how participants are reacting during the outcome, so we're going to go ahead and just keep it the way it is right now. All right, and then we're going to add one more thing to this object. So now on a per trial basis, we have basically the game that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and try to run it and see if we can get this thing to run quick. Going to click on test here. All right. I don't necessarily need to log data right now. All right, so welcome to the task. Here's our bet. There's our interface, and then I click on this next button to continue. So now I have my interface. This is round 1. I'm going to bet that 5 is going to be rolled. So I click on 5, and it looks like E prime is going to kind of bomb out there. It says unable to load image file, dice movie forward score 5.mts. So let's take a look. So here it's in this folder called Dice Movie, and if I look at my dice roll here, you can see that I have an incorrect folder reference. So it's not Dice Movies, it is just Dice Movie. So that's something that you do need to keep track of too, is that you name that folder or that subfolder exactly correctly. And the reason that I was looking there is just because of the error. It says unable to load image file or load movie file not found. So it's just EEPRIME's way of telling you, hey, there's something wrong with this movie file, I can't find it. So if you can't find it, the easiest way or the best way is just to look in here. And keep in mind that EEPRIME is rather sensitive about what you type in here. It needs to match it exactly. So for example, if I take this and I put like 5 spaces at the end, EEPRIME will be looking for those 5 spaces at the end. So you need to make sure that these match exactly what you would have. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and try test one more time here. Welcome screen, bet screen, interface screen, place my bet. Still going to bet on that 5. There's my dice roll. Ah, and I got a 2. Dang it. And then there's that too bad you lost. So now I'm at $0. So I want to go ahead and go for a safe bet now. All right, bet a 3. So I'm going to get, so it'll say, once that's done, congratulations, you've won $100. So there you go. And I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this just so you don't have to watch me win and lose 18 times. More likely than not, you're going to watch me lose 18 times, so I'll save you my humiliation. All right, now the only thing I want to add to the end of this is I want to add a final score for participants. So I'm going to go back into this session proc here, and I'm going to add an inline object. And this is just going to be a very simple attribute. So I'm going to say c.setAttrib final score. That way this is nice and easy to find in the data file, and I'm just going to set this to that end balance attribute. Now keep in mind that since I made it a global variable, I can reference it over and over and over and over again. So I'm just going to reference that. Now, admittedly, I have been kind of shirking some best practices. I apologize. You're going to want to change the name of this inline to what it's doing as well. So I will just say set final score. And then I'm going to change the name of this inline to process winnings. It could be winnings or losings, but we like to be optimistic here at PST. All right, so there's my set final score. And then all I need is a little text display object there. I'm going to call this one final score. And I'm just going to make a very simple just message telling them. So thank you very much for playing. Your final score was, and then I'll do a $sign and then an attribute reference to that final score. And it'll show up as either positive or negative. EEPRIME will automatically add that minus sign if it's negative. And then we'll say, press space to end the task. Then of course all we're going to do is click on this property page icon, click on duration input, set this to 1000, add a keyboard input mask, and change my allowable to space. And we'll set data log into time audit only. Click apply and OK to make those changes, and that's all you need to do. Alright, so that is all you need to do to make our game of dice task. Like I said, this is going to be available on our experiment library. This video is also going to be embedded there as well if you were wondering how I made this task. So it'll be pretty easy for you to find. If you have absolutely any questions about this or any other task, please feel free to go to support.pstnet.com. We're always happy to answer any questions that you guys have. As always, feel free to give a like on this video if you liked what you saw today, and go ahead and subscribe to our page. I roll these things out once a week, so I do mine I do these live streams every Thursday at 10:30. Generally speaking, they aren't as long as today's, but today's was a bit of a complex task. It involved a lot of very intricate little parts and had some inline script as well. So generally speaking, they're about an hour long. Like I said, once every Thursday. If you have any ideas or if you have a task that you'd like to see, go ahead and leave us a comment and say, oh, I'd like to see another Stroop task, or I'd like to see, whatever task you would like. Actually, next week's is something that we had gotten feedback from. Somebody wanted to see a bimodal priming task, so that's exactly what we're doing. So if you're working on a task, or if you find that there's something in ePrime that, is a little tricky for you to figure out, let me know, and I'd be happy to do a live stream on it and answer your guys' questions. But if you guys need any more help, like I said, go to support.pstnet.com. A lot of great resources on there, and this task as well. But that is all the content I have for you guys today. Thank you guys very much, and have a great day.